Hello and good morning, and welcome to your morning briefing for Monday, the 16th of June, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. With that, let's bring Robert on. Good morning, Robert. Let's go ahead and jump into the domestic sit rep here.
Good morning, Mike. So, over the weekend, President Donald Trump ordered ICE to expand illegal immigrant detention and deportation operations in major American cities. And according to his Truth Social post putting this order out, this includes Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. And he said these major U.S. cities are the, quote, core of the Democrat power center, where he said Democrats are using illegal aliens to expand their voter base, cheat in elections, and grow the welfare state, which he said is taking away benefits and jobs from U.S. citizens. And then, down in Texas, Marathon Petroleum's Galveston Bay refinery, and this is in Texas City, Texas, caught fire on Saturday. Marathon Petroleum said that no employees were injured or killed, and they're currently deploying air monitoring in the area. And the Texas City Office of Emergency Management has lifted a shelter-in-place order that was put in place Saturday afternoon. This refinery has a crude oil refining capacity of about 630,000 barrels per day, which means that there's a potential of a loss of 3.5% of refining capacity in the United States, depending on how much damage this fire has caused.
Yeah, Robert, this is significant for a couple of reasons, as we talked about last week. The United States does not have really an oil extraction problem. It has a oil refining problem, because that's our major choke point here. Just given what's going on in the Middle East with Israel and Iran targeting each other's oil refineries, is there any reason? I know accidents happen. Is there any reason to believe this could be sabotage?
I haven't seen anything yet come out of the Texas City authorities or Texas state level authorities that there are any signs of foul play here. I mean, it's possible that there could have been. It could be the result of physical sabotage or even some type of cyber attack on the refinery itself, because that's something we've seen increase over the last couple of years is cyber attacks targeting industry. So in this case, I think not just manufacturing, but U.S. energy seems like a major target for state-linked hacker that would want to cause damage to U.S. supply chains. In this case, like you pointed out, this is a major choke point for the U.S. energy industry.
Mm-hmm. And just as a reminder, our obligatory response to anything involving an armed conflict with Iran is make sure your gas tanks are filled up. Especially as we moved on throughout the rest of this week, I think there's a pretty good chance that Iran tries to wind this thing down with Israel. But the worst case scenario is that they don't. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on to our global sit rep, starting with the G7. Jared, good morning.
Good morning. So G7 is meeting up in Alberta, Canada right now. This is U.S., Canada, Japan, UK, the whole lot. And in addition to that, President Trump is scheduled to meet with Ukrainian President Zelensky, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, all on the sidelines. There are a few other major representatives that are there that may also meet with Trump. And additionally, the South Korean President, Mr. Lee, called for better relations with Japan ahead of their 60th anniversary diplomatic relations. And the reason this is actually significant is that this is actually a pretty significant change from his stance on Japan. He was very anti-Japan. And Japan is effectively the diplomatic center point for the anti-China coalition in the Asia Pacific. So actually maintaining this relationship or even improving it, because he said he wants to keep it on the same course, which it has been gradually improving over the last 5-ish years. I think that's a pretty significant signal that he's going to switch back to, maintaining the South Korean position in the anti-China coalition, which we were very, very worried that he would actually step into more of a neutral position.
All right. Thanks for that, Jared. And coming up today, we have 35 protests, which is about the baseline for the week, for weekdays. And then moving on here, let's do a quick roll up on what we saw over the weekend. So Saturday's No Kings marches and protests. Well, number one, they're being called the largest single-day protest event in Trump's second term. I've seen claims of 5 million protesters, and they say that will be the largest single-day protest in U.S. history. If I have some doubts that this is true. I'm not sure that we saw 5 million. I guess we'll see and let some of the numbers keep playing out. But if it's true, that would surpass the 3 million that we saw turn out for the 5th of April hands-off day of protest, which at that time was the largest single day protest event during this Trump administration. I'm naturally skeptical for a couple of reasons. Number one, some event organizers claimed that they mobilized 5 million protesters back in April. That was obviously inflated. I said there was no way they had 5 million back in April. That number was probably closer to 3 million. And so, I look at that and I say, well, these Saturday's numbers are, well, I'll just say this. It is politically and socially beneficial to inflate these numbers. And so I think that's another good reason why they will continue to be inflated. Just anecdotally, I've seen firsthand reports. Some people say that they saw large turnouts in some small towns where you would not expect to see large turnouts. I've seen other people say it was pretty anemic turnout in some places where you would expect to see larger protests. So I'm seeing a lot of mixed messages there from people who are at these events. Moving on, most of these events over the weekend actually did remain peaceful during the day. That's why what I said, last week on Friday, I said I expected that to happen. Indivisible and 5051, they're not violent organizations. They've been stressing peaceful protests, and I said that's probably what we'll continue to see. Although I did mention that the risk of political violence was high, like isolated political violence. And over the weekend, there was one victim that was shot in Salt Lake City, allegedly by a leftist gunman. Another man was arrested for driving his vehicle through a protest in Virginia. Before we move on to the protest, to the violence that occurred during the night, let's bring Robert on and check in with this. All right, so there was a shooting in Salt Lake City, and apparently it was the gunman was a leftist. What's the latest there?
Yeah, this was 24-year-old Arturo Gamboa, and this is coming from the Salt Lake City Police Department. And they said that actually security personnel with 5051 who was running this No Kings protest confronted him when they saw him bring a rifle out and start walking toward the crowd. Apparently, he saw basically, from what I can gather, walking toward the crowd at the low ready as if he's getting ready to shoot them. And then one bystander was killed when they exchanged gunfire. From what the Salt Lake City police have said, his motives are still unclear. According to them, he has no criminal history, and they believe he was acting alone. But from what I've seen, he has been interviewed in the media in the past, and some of his social media activity points to him having very strong far-left political beliefs. And so I ask, I think the key question here is, why would somebody with strong far-left political beliefs attack the No Kings protest? And I think he could have had the goal of spurring some type of political or violent retaliation against Trump, the Trump administration, or Trump supporters, effectively the far left equivalent of right-wing accelerationism.
Yeah, maybe. I also saw someone, I think someone who was there, say that he was trying to shoot someone else who was openly carrying, and he missed and ended up shooting someone else that was not a part of this confrontation at the protest. So I guess we'll just have to check on the details and go back and see what actually happened there. But thanks for that, Robert. All right, let's go ahead and move on. As I expected and told everyone last week, the stuff during the day was probably going to be mostly peaceful, which it was. And then I said all bets are off for nighttime violence, which we did see later on Saturday night. So most of this violence did occur after the protests had ended. Here's what we saw. Starting in Los Angeles, California, police ordered a mob to disperse after militants began throwing rocks, bricks, and bottles, in addition to launching commercial-grade fireworks. So a lot of the stuff we have seen going back to the 6th of June. Militants also vandalized a Hilton hotel in Los Angeles. Over in Denver, police made 36 arrests for failure to disperse, also for obstruction and throwing projectiles. Over in Atlanta, which is another place where we've seen pretty frequent clashes with police. At least 8 arrests were made after a group of individuals apparently were attempting to block traffic on an interstate there, I-285. This is interesting. This guy was quoted in Axios. His name is Zach Norton. He's claims to be a member of a group called Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. Oh, that's the Answer Coalition. At any rate, he said, quote, "The laws may be legal." He's talking about immigration laws. "The laws may be legal, but we the people have a duty to challenge unjust laws and work to change them by protesting and speaking out for what we believe is right." At any rate, in Portland, Oregon, 4 police officers were injured when rioters in Black Bloc attempted to breach the ICE facility there, and allegedly they're trying to set it on fire. Authorities declared the gathering unlawful around 6:30 p.m. and then reported that the mob had turned violent by 8 p.m. Law enforcement later secured that ICE facility, and police made at least three arrests specifically for assault. This is coming from this quote right here is from the Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin. She said, quote, "Portland rioters are violently targeting federal law enforcement, and we won't sit idly by and watch these cowards." By the way, it does not take cowardice to attack federal law enforcement. You can call it bravery, or you can call it, I don't know, you can call it a lot of things. Attacking federal law enforcement is not a cowardly act. Knowing that if you are arrested, you're going to face 10 years in jail. I mean, it's just not a cowardly thing to do. There's a lot of cowardly things to do, and I'm not lionizing any attacks on federal law enforcement. I'm just saying, on the right, there is such a focus on firearms and go to the range and go practice my footwork on CQB and go practice all this stuff. And it's stuff that the average person is just not only probably not ever going to use, but definitely not using anytime soon. And they're so fast to castigate these violent left-wing mobs and left-wing militants, really the revolutionary left, and characterize them as cowardly. And they're out there every single night fighting with cops. It's just not something a cowardly person would do. I'd probably say a cowardly person is far more likely to spend obscene amounts of time and money and energy practicing CQB, stuff that they'll probably never use. I'm talking just about the average American doing these things. So I hate to digress, but I just want to point out, for all the bravado and all of the chest pounding that we see on the right every single day, these left-wing militants are out there fighting with federal law enforcement every single night. I mean, they're the true revolutionaries. And it's just a shame to see a lot of the bravado by people sitting on their couch, coming from people who are sitting on their couch on Twitter, when it's the left that's actually going out and committing these truly revolutionary acts. At any rate, I digress. This lady at DHS continues, quote, "These rioters have launched fireworks, smoke grenades, and thrown rocks at federal law enforcement. A mob broke glass and forcibly entered the ICE facility. Thankfully, federal law enforcement was able to secure the facility. 4 officers were injured during the attack," end quote. And then we'll wrap up here in Seattle, Washington. Militants started a fire outside a federal building in downtown Seattle. In a separate incident, militants also built a blockade. Actually, they built 2 blockades and attacked a DHS facility in nearby, I think you pronounce it Tukwila, Washington. It's in the greater Seattle area. Journalist Andy No pointed out that there is a large disparity between the actual violence that's happening in Seattle and then what's being reported in Seattle area media, which is no surprise. But kudos to all the people who are on the ground taking video and live streaming all these attacks, because you don't hear about the details. It's not at Axios, it's not at CNN, it's not even at Fox News, it's not in the local Seattle press. It's coming out from these journalists who are on the ground taking photographs and video of what's actually happening. It's really a travesty. Just looking at how Axios and these other media outlets are covering the violence, it's like they downplay what's actually going on. Very harmful for the country, in my opinion. At any rate, despite what may be historic turnout, again, I doubt we probably saw 5 million people turn out, but I expected to be on par with the 3 million that we saw back in April. At any rate, despite whatever those numbers actually are, the level of protest and disruption that we're seeing, even though it is kind of a high watermark since 2021, it is still closer to what we saw in 2017 than what we saw in 2020. The size and scope and intensity of the violence is nowhere near 2020. And I still have not been convinced that we will have a summer of love that even comes close to the scale and intensity of 2020. There are some reasons to believe that we will soon see some more escalation on this front. However, I do just want to make this one last point before we move on. The level of violence and direct action and rioting over the weekend grew from 3 cities late last week to 5 cities. It's often the case that maybe we see 1 or 2 other cities that had violence, that I missed coming in on a Monday morning trying to catch back up on everything that happened over the weekend. But we're talking about violence that's happening in 5 cities. That is not 2020-esque. That's not even 2017-esque. We're still, I think, far below the threshold of what we saw in 2017, much less 2020. At any rate, that said, there is a reason to expect some escalation. President Trump confirmed what I reported last week, which is that federal law enforcement are planning to ramp up immigration enforcement operations in sanctuary cities. And this is something that Robert previously covered, but in a post on Truth Social, President Trump said, quote, "We must expand efforts to detain and deport illegal aliens in America's largest cities, such as Los Angeles, California, and New York, where millions upon millions of illegal aliens reside." Now, I've seen Democrats argue that President Trump is politicizing federal law enforcement by sending them into these Democrat cities. And just being objective, I can see their argument. But when you put this into context, it's really just a matter of practicality. Sanctuary cities hold the largest numbers of illegal aliens in the country, and you have to go fishing where the fish are. It does not make a lot of sense to go into what you might characterize a low target environment in a city in a red state, which is still governed by Democrats. It doesn't make sense to go expend a lot of time and energy and resources and political capital doing that when you can go straight into the belly of the beast in these sanctuary cities and possibly force a Supreme Court decision that sanctuary cities are illegal. I don't know how we haven't had this yet, but maybe we will. At any rate, it's really a matter of practicality, not just for that, but when you consider that Democrats may flip the House in next year's midterms, they will make it virtually impossible for the White House to do all these immigration enforcement operations that they want to do. So this is kind of a now or never situation. I mean, it's got to be done now. And so that's probably another big reason why the Trump administration is going right into the belly of the beast in these sanctuary cities to ramp up immigration enforcement operations rather than wait. So, all right, that's all I have for that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next item here. Robert, there's a think tank that said, or 2 think tanks that say Trump may actually be having a very large impact on net migration. What's going on?
So this is a sneak preview of a paper that is going to be published by the Brookings Institute and the American Enterprise Institute. And economists from these 2 think tanks say that the U.S. is going to have negative immigration for the first time in 50 years, due specifically to Trump policies on deportation and border security and also revoking student visas. And they said that this net negative immigration could spur some economic issues, including inflation, reduce tax revenues, and cause some labor shortages in key sectors like agriculture and construction. So I haven't been able to read the paper yet because it's not published, but I think they are correct that net negative immigration is going to have at least a temporary negative impact on some key industries like agriculture, construction, the hospitality, food processing. As we saw over the weekend with the Trump administration, kind of putting out this message of backing off of immigration enforcement on some of these, especially agriculture sector. However, I think their estimate that net negative immigration is going to decrease tax revenue that they start propping up entitlement programs and state spending is not telling the entire truth about the impact of illegal immigration on government spending, because we covered this actually 2 weeks ago. Congressional Budget Office report on the 5th of June showed that, in fact, illegal immigration during the Biden administration cost states roughly twice as much in entitlement spending as they took in tax revenue. And I think the number was something like 19.5 billion versus about 10 billion in tax revenue brought in. But what is interesting about this is that I think it also highlights that there's a lot of criticism of the Trump administration that the Obama administration, the Biden administration, and the second the Bush the W. Bush administration deported millions, and the Trump administration has not basically done anything. But if you look at the numbers, there was basically either no net change in immigration, illegal immigration as well, or actually an increase despite the numbers claimed from previous administrations of deportations. So far, the Trump administration is actually, at least according to the numbers from these economists, because we haven't gotten official numbers from the census or from the U.S. government statistics bureaus on actual impact yet. It does appear that the Trump administration has had a major impact on net migration.
All right, thanks for that, Robert. Yeah, let's move on here to this assassin. I guess over the weekend we heard about this guy shot at least 2 people, maybe more. What's the latest here?
Yeah, this is Vance Bolter, and he's been accused of the murder of a Minnesota state representative, Melissa Hortman, who is a member of the Democrat Farmer and Labor Party, which is the Minnesota state version of the Democratic Party. He's accused of murdering her and her husband, and also attempting to murder State Senator John Hoffman, who's also a member of the DFL party, which occurred after Hortman's murder. And I think like this combined with what we talked earlier about what happened in Salt Lake City, I think the threshold for political violence is lowering currently. We're seeing more incidents of political violence, which I think will ease the way for more radicalized or self-radicalized people to engage in political violence. There's a lot of speculation going around about this incident and Vance Bolter specifically. There's not a lot of confirmed details yet, I think. So I don't want to speculate on what his motivations were. However, I don't think it's actually important if he had political motivations or not. Just the appearance of political motivations or the perception that violence is political, I think, lowers that threshold. And I have seen a bipartisan response, especially from state level lawmakers that are attempting to turn down the political temperature. But I don't think that lawmaker statements alone condemning political violence may be enough to actually preempt future political violent attacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Robert, I share your concern about the threshold of political violence being lowered. We'll say there's still a large difference though in opportunistic violence on the one hand, and then lone wolf political violence, and then organized political violence. And I don't think we're getting closer to organized political violence, which is team sports. It's when a group of people go out and conduct political violence, like a guerrilla group or something like that. I don't think maybe we're getting close to that. I don't think we're close to organized political violence, because most of what we've seen are individual acts of even in some cases armed political violence. So I do agree with you that the threshold is being lowered. Now, I also saw videos over the weekend, especially yesterday. This guy, what an extremely odd case. So this guy, he has a wife, he's got 5 kids, and he lives in this home, and then he owns this other home where he also lives part-time. He's got a roommate that said he's a Trump voter, et cetera, et cetera. Extremely abnormal. I don't know what's up with this guy. Have you seen anything more about that, Robert?
So from what I've seen, his roommate at the house where they served this warrant at, so he's escaped from police twice apparently. So once at the state representative Hortman's home, where I saw reports that he actually got in an exchange of gunfire with a police officer and then escaped on foot. And then a second time escaped while a warrant was being served on that house, where he apparently lives with a childhood friend of 40 years, according to the guy that was interviewed at that house. I have seen people dig into some of his financial background. Like he was a general manager for a large, basically an industrial bakery that was bought out by 7-Eleven. He also has been running an NGO that it was attempting to do some type of agriculture and water projects in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And he's also had some unusual real estate transactions. So it's, I think the speculation, one of the speculations going around is that this was actually his response to being broke. Basically, he had like a breaking point financially, and just that spurred him to action. But it's a very unusual case because I think his wife was also caught later was also detained by police, I think either Sunday morning or Saturday night, carrying like $50,000 in cash on her. So this is just a lot of unusual details, and I think some of it is also being distorted as far as like what's being reported. And then I think like a lot of violent incidents in the first couple of days, there's going to be inaccurate reporting coming out because people are trying to be the first to get those reports out in the media. And I agree that when I say like the threshold for political violence, I'm talking about the lone wolf, stuff like this, because this is much more, I think much more difficult to address in a state capacity than something like organized political violence. And this was even true during the Tesla takedown stuff we saw and reported on, that there were a handful of organized attacks on like Tesla dealerships, but the vast majority of the arsons and things like that were individual self-radicalized actors, and a lot of them were targets of opportunity.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, lots still to come out, I imagine, on this guy. So thanks for that update, Robert. And let's move on here to the latest going on between Israel and Iran. Jared, please catch us up to speed.
Will do. So Iran and Israel continued to trade strikes over the weekend. Iran successfully hit Tel Aviv several times, which caused power outages and fires. They also did the same thing in Haifa, which is a major port for the Israeli Navy. Now, Israel asked the United States to formally join its war against Iran over the weekend, and the U.S. reportedly said, no, not happening. Now, the United States did deploy the USS Thomas Hudner, a DDG, to the Eastern Mediterranean, likely for ballistic defense. I've seen some people kind of talking about, the USS Nimitz is definitely going out there. It's, going out there in response to this. I don't think that's actually true. I think it was scheduled to be there already. At most, it's maybe a week ahead of time. But the carrier striker that's already out there has been on deployment for 7 months. It looks like it's about ready to rotate out anyway. Moving on to the president, anonymous U.S. officials actually claimed that President Trump told the Israelis not to carry out a plan to assassinate Iran's Ayatollah after the Israelis presented it to him over the weekend. The president also continues to say that the U.S. will not be involved in is not involved in Israel strikes on Iran, and the U.S. will only get involved if Iran attacks the United States in any way. So attacking, bases, personnel, stuff like that. That is maintaining the same line of, do not attack us. We will stay out of this. You guys fight it out, to incentivize Iran to keep this at a relatively low level compared to what would happen if the U.S. was involved. All right, moving over to Taiwan. Now, former commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, it wasn't the Indo-Pacific Command yet, and former director of national intelligence, Dennis Blair, told Taiwanese media over the weekend that in 2027, quote, Taiwanese and American capability will be higher relative to PLA capabilities. That's People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army. Now, Blair added that Taiwan would need to hold out for several months while awaiting a regional response from Japan, the Philippines, and the United States, and the unmanned surface vessels that they're building would likely help them do so. All that should sound fairly familiar for Early Warning and for Observer subscribers. We've talked about that for months. But I do want to point out, this is actually the second interview I've seen with U.S. government adjacent individuals, such as Mr. Blair, or the first one I saw was a China expert for a policy development think tank. They're starting to cast doubt on whether or not China will follow through on the Davidson window. I think from here, the most dangerous course of action for the United States would be to back off of its military buildup and not continue pressing its advantage. If the U.S. is ahead of China, taking into account the coalition as well, then it would make sense to continue to press it and truly deter the Chinese. If the U.S. backs off, that would probably destabilize confidence in the United States as a security guarantor, which underpins the entire anti-China coalition, and that is the main deterring force against China, which would potentially hand the wind to China. Now, as such, I will continue to monitor for any kind of signs that the U.S. would back off of this. I don't think the U.S. is going to do so, but if they do, I'll monitor and I'll report for the audience.
All right, thanks for that, Jared. Hey, sorry, let's go back to the Iran slide. I was pulling up my notes on that.
Okay.
So last Friday, I was just looking at what are the chances that this Iran-Israel conflict spins out and we get an oil crisis, because I saw a lot of people saying, this is how you get $1,000 oil. I'm naturally skeptical on that. But basically, we're looking at four, not really worst case scenarios, but four things that if I saw happen, I would be very concerned about an oil crisis. And I bring this up because we have had 10 economic recessions since 1960, and six of the 10 recessions we've had since 1960 were triggered, or at least in part, were contributed to by a price spike in oil. So those four things were: the United States cannot get involved overtly or militarily against Iran, i.e. having some military operation against Iran. The next is the conflict cannot expand to other oil-producing countries. The third thing is Iranian oil structure on the Gulf gets destroyed, which apparently Israel has been targeting some of those. We're talking about refineries and oil terminals. And then the fourth thing was disruption to oil shipments via the Strait of Hormuz, regardless of the cause. Iran has previously threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz repeatedly, multiple times over the past several years, in regard to what's been going on with Israel. And then I saw where the Iranian parliament was maybe even supposed to vote on whether they were going to close down the Strait of Hormuz today. Have you seen anything on that?
So I saw that it was floated. I haven't seen that the parliament's supposed to vote. That would significantly change the situation, and that would potentially. I've seen that there's, just using the vague quote here, a extra electronic interference in the Strait of Hormuz right now. That's interfering with AIS, the automatic identification system all ships use, and GPS. I didn't put a whole lot of stock into it because interference is not necessarily jamming. But if you are preparing to do so, or at least taking the steps to fulfill the order if it comes, I would expect a lot more systems to go online, causing that interference.
Mm-hmm. Well, if the Iranians do attempt to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, the whole world will be affected.
Yeah.
But Iran would be shooting themselves in the foot, and also the Chinese in the foot, because the Iranian government is funded, like many Middle Eastern governments. They get like 30% of their government revenue for funding from the oil trade. I think something like 90% of Iranian oil goes to China. China's Iranian oil consists of about 10 to 15% of all of Chinese oil imports. So not catastrophic for China, but they're going to feel the difference if they immediately start losing out on 10 to 15% of their oil supply. So this is a scenario where Iran does not have a lot of good options other than to make a peace agreement. I guess, Jared, you saw last night we had 24 of those aerial refueling tankers up in the air leaving the continental United States, headed for the Middle East and Europe. There's some speculation maybe they're going to a NATO exercise. Seems kind of large for a NATO exercise. And if they're going to the Middle East, it does not look good for the United States staying out of a military conflict. I know President Trump has still been pressing for negotiations with Iran. I hope this is a lot more art of the deal, where the Iranians see a carrier strike group move into the Mediterranean and then seeing these refueling tankers heading to the Middle East. I hope that's to build pressure on Iran to come to the table and talk this out. At some point, you just have to say, how long are talks actually going to hold up? Are we all going to be in this scenario again in another 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road? Because it's pretty much all talking with the Iranians get us. I'm definitely not advocating for war with Iran. I'm just stating the reality, which is talks will probably not be a permanent solution. So what do you make of this when you see those 24 refuelers headed to the Middle East?
I'll have to double check. I want to say there was not one of similar size, but similar nature when the October strikes happened, where there were several tankers heading out that way, but they never. I want to say there was one or two that did end up in the Middle East, but not all of them. And that to me says that you're probably setting up. You probably just need them on station to rotate them out without actually having to deploy forces. But when big things like this happen, we always see, at least from what I've seen, it looks like the same forces deploy every time. You get, your airlift capacity with an air refuel capacity and a carrier moved to wherever the situation is, and you just sit there to monitor the situation to potentially respond. That to me doesn't say, oh yeah, definitely moving in. It says that the U.S. is doing what it does as a global hegemon. If we need to reopen the Straits of Hormuz, we can do it in a timely fashion.
Mm-hmm. Well, great point. That was my next question. It seems like the likelihood is very high that the Trump administration will order the Navy to reopen the Strait of Hormuz if Iran does attempt to close it down. An astounding amount, I don't recall the number off the top of my head, but a lot of oil transits there. And so
I want to say,
is this, are we looking at a Navy, are we looking at an actual U.S. contingency operation, what's called an OCO, Overseas Contingency Operation, to reopen the strait if Iran does attempt to close it down?
That's hard to say. I mean, for what, almost 30 years now, maybe even closer to 40 since praying mantis, like that's been a consistent practice. So if there is an operation, it's really not even that far off of the baseline. Is you prepare for that, and there are. I saw it was the United States Naval Institute mentioned that there was one LCS with a mine countermeasures package that was also in the Persian Gulf, and they're expecting two more with similar packages to show up there as well. But they were scheduled for that rotation anyway. So all of these forces are building up there, but they're all already scheduled. I think that Iran would have to look at this and say, well, if I shut down the Strait of Hormuz, the last time I did this, I didn't have a Navy for 30 years. So maybe I won't do this. Maybe we'll just leave it open. If I were Iran planning to do that, I would try to make it a targeted operation similar to what the Houthis did, rather than do a blanket, we're shutting down the strait. So maybe the U.S. flag tankers continue to go through, but if there's somebody heading to Israel, take it out.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks for that, Jared. And we will get to some questions. I got sick over the weekend, so if my voice, we'll cut the show off if my voice goes. But for now, regarding U.S. refining limits and vulnerabilities, does Canada and Mexico have much of any refinery capacity to make up a difference should the U.S. have extended refinery outage for any reason? Well, every so often we hear, why can't we just buy oil from Mexico? They're an oil exporting country. And the problem is refineries are built to process a specific type of oil. So you've probably heard of sweet or sour crude and heavy or light crude. And a lot of the stuff that comes from Mexico is sour. It is high in sulfur, and we do not have the refineries capable of processing that heavy sour crude coming out of Mexico. So this is not just, you can't just buy oil from anywhere and refine it in the United States. In terms of refineries, Canada and Mexico both do have refineries. I don't recall what their actual fuel output is. But in terms of making up the difference, I don't know. I would have to go back and look at the numbers. But great question, Frozen Nomad. We'll have to get back to you on that. How do the revolutionaries pay their bills? I mean, the Rev left, revolutionary left. I mean, I imagine a lot of them are on some government programs. And I don't know. Some of them have jobs. They work at wherever they work at. I don't know. They make money. I don't look at the Rev Left and say, well, they're maybe they are on some government programs. I don't know. I imagine they have jobs. Have you heard of any news of the F the Fourth activities this year? I will tell you, last year, this was one of the biggest indicators that I said that led me to believe that the Antifa and the far left were not going to do anything for the election, or probably not anything for the inauguration. And that is last June, they started publicizing. Almost every year, there's some level of F the Fourth. I'm not going to say the word, but it's the F word, F the Fourth. And that's kind of the middle finger. It's an event. And it's like they're a narco-communist event against the United States. And, they publish a lot of propaganda about how Independence Day is, I don't know, whatever they say. But it's their middle finger to the 4th of July and Independence Day. And they canceled it last year. They're trying to run F the Fourth events in like Portland, Seattle, Houston, New York. And they canceled because no one was going to show up. And I just thought, we have this like semi-annual event, or this perennial event called F the Fourth. And they're not running one this year. This is in 2024. They're not running one this year. And because no one's going to show up. And I looked at that, I just said, this is not normal. This is pretty abnormal. And I do think it just these networks have atrophied, and they're having problems getting the level of participation that they had in 2017 and 2020. I've not seen anything yet on F the Fourth activities this year, but I'll continue to look out for it. Has Ukraine solved the problem of not having aircraft carriers? How many drones sitting on containers could possibly be sitting around our country in the future? I don't know. I think Ukraine probably has solved the problem of not having aircraft carriers. I would not necessarily call it a problem for Ukraine because they've been armed with these Storm Shadow missiles from the UK and a bunch of these other missiles from NATO countries. And so they've had the ability to fire into Crimea and Sevastopol. And Jared, didn't they pretty much effectively chase the Russian Black Sea Fleet out of Crimea? They basically forced them to sea. They can't just sit in the ports because of the Storm Shadow missiles.
I'll go double check that. I don't remember seeing that they had left port. They definitely got attacked in port, but I thought the Russians just increased security around the ships, which is easily doable. I mean, there are so many ways you can increase port security. It's costly, but you can do it. It's better than losing, a CGN. But yeah, you mentioned, does Ukraine even have a problem not having carriers? That's a great point, because Ukraine's main security threat is a land border, not a sea border, and carriers are for moving basically preventing an invasion. You can move the initial battle line far out. Ukraine doesn't need to do that. They need to worry about what's on the other side of Kharkov.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. And then in terms of how many drones, let's go back to the drones question. How many drones sitting on containers could possibly be around our country in the future? I mean, that's kind of the $1 trillion question. I'd say that just based off what we've seen, and even in the Israeli attacks on Iran, apparently they did kind of the same thing that Ukraine did, which was build drones, either, I guess, probably inside Iran, build them or assemble them there, or maybe they smuggled them in. And apparently they used those drones to take out some of these nuclear scientists. So just a massive intelligence operation to go along with the strikes by Mossad and IDF inside Iran. That Pandora's box has been opened. I'd be real surprised if we do not see drone attacks domestically in the United States. And it doesn't even have to be in a period of conflict with some nation state. I mean, I think terrorists have picked up on this and kind of realized there are just a lot of targets of opportunity. We have a massive surface area for attack because we have a lot of critical infrastructure that's just not guarded. And everything I'm seeing from DOD and DHS and other people are saying You don't actually have the capability to defend against drone swarms here domestically, Jared.
Yeah. Well, from what I was seeing on the Israelis, they had set up drone factories in Iran, which, if true, then not so much worried about containers as you are the fact that they have a way to produce them and continue attacks. I mean, really, the one kind of silver lining that I've seen with drone warfare develop is that it seems like the only way to get around drone jamming has been fiber optics. So you're very limited on what the actual range can be, and it almost kind of makes its own later wave defenses. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of Ukraine's forests now. They're just spider webbed with dropped fiber optic cables from these drones. So, that's a navigational hazard for any future drones later on. The more you do it, the worse it gets. So I guess that's kind of a silver lining. It ends up defending against itself. But in the initial attack, there's not a lot you can do unless you just blanket jam the frequencies all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to go in for people who are unfamiliar with the fiber optic drones, traditional drones that operate on basically Wi-Fi signals or electronic radio frequencies, they're susceptible to jamming and all other types of attacks. What happens is you basically you end up hardwiring with fiber optic. You end up hardwiring a drone so that it is not flying based off radio frequencies. It's flying based off a hardwire back to the drone pilot, and so it's less susceptible to. It's not susceptible to jamming, less susceptible to electronic warfare, much more difficult to stop.
Yeah, well, it does show you where the operator is.
Yeah, well, that too. Well, I mean, it's part of the whole shoot, move, communicate thing. You got to be moving if you're a drone operator. All right, based on videos out of Israel, it appears that Iran is using some hypersonic missiles. Has this been confirmed? Well, aren't ICBMs, are they technically hypersonic?
Yeah, they're.
So I saw a video.
Know the exact speeds, but
someone posted that. Yeah, so someone posted a video. I did see it, and they commented, "Is Iran using hypersonics?" Because one missile appeared to be faster than the other, and I think that was just relative to the point of view of the video operator. Something that is next to you appears to be going much faster than something that's far away, even though they're going the same speed limit. Yeah. So I don't know if that's hypersonics. If they were, they're almost certainly coming from China or maybe Iran.
I think a lot of people overestimate or rather underestimate the speed of most missiles. The published data is that your slowest missile is moving at 0.9 Mach. That's the published data. Okay, cool. That's 630 miles an hour at sea level. 630 miles an hour is not slow. That is very fast. So up close, that's going to look like it's screaming by, and it is. Being able to visually tell the difference between that and Mach 5, I don't think you can do. Like, they're both going to be so fast, your brain actually has trouble processing it. It's just, they're fast. Mm-hmm. And the speed difference really only makes a difference for ballistic missile defense. You're not outrunning a missile, even if no matter what speed it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks, Jared. How long will it take the U.S. to build more refineries? Also, we had a refinery fire over the weekend. How will that affect our supply? Yeah, Robert covered that on the beginning of the show. Robert, what do you say? Up to 3% of U.S. refining capacity or something?
Yeah, depending on how extensive the damage is, it's about 3.5% of the total capacity. And from what I could find, the Energy Information Administration says we have 162 total refineries in the U.S., but that's including smaller refineries. And according to the EIA, the last time we built a refinery that had roughly a similar capacity to the Galveston Bay Marathon Petroleum Refinery was 1977, was when the newest one of that size refinery was built. And I think the last one, smaller refinery, was built in 2022. And from what I can see, the estimates for how long it would take to build an additional one is 3 to 5 years. because that all depends on the environmental permitting and going through that entire environmental impact review process with every federal agency with the relevant mission for that, and including Department of Energy, Department of Interior. I think the Trump administration has also been trying to lower that timeline as part of this more general attempt to expand U.S. energy. But I'm still waiting to see how that's actually going to impact building like these additional power plants, potentially additional petroleum refineries. So that's kind of 3 to 5 years, I think, is a good estimate for now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed that a lot of people have been talking about the lengthy permitting process. I would imagine that the Energy Department, DOE, has some sort of ability to push through permitting.
Yeah, it depends on the real hang up is the courts, because the environmental groups can sue over if they argue that the process as it's outlined by law was not followed to the T. They can file a lawsuit and hold it up, potentially for at least an additional year, depending on how long that case takes for them to actually get a decision. And so that, then you're talking an additional year on top of actually getting it built. So 4 to 6 years. But Chris Wright, the energy secretary, they have said explicitly that they're trying to get this permitting process done faster. I think we reported on a couple of weeks ago, they've already started approving, basically fast tracking permits for some projects like that Bulls Mountain coal project in Montana. And I think they're also looking at some other critical mineral mining projects they're trying to fast track. And I haven't seen yet if they have been doing the same thing with any oil or natural gas projects.
All right. Hey, and just real briefly, I've noticed since I'm on the road, I pay attention to gas prices. I noticed they have started ticking up over the past several days. But even I'm looking at WTI and Brent, and after about a $10 jump, they're actually starting to recede. So it looks like oil traders are not expecting much more out of Iran and Israel. And they generally, that's their business, and they have their ears to the ground there. So I would say that's probably a good sign of Iran and Israel not escalating. They could be wrong, obviously, but I think that's a good sign. All right, Jared, any other questions? Are the cartels involved in oil theft from either Mexico or from smaller independent U.S. oil producers? Yeah, oil theft from the cartels is big money in Mexico. I'm not sure what they're doing in the U.S. I don't know that oil theft is a major problem yet, like it is in Mexico. Couldn't tell you.
All right, and we had one left over from last week. The U.S. has a long history. This is from YouTube. The U.S. has a long history of providing military support to Israel. If the USA is building the Riviera in Gaza, what is the likelihood that the USA will be dragged further into the war? Well, there's nothing official yet on who's going to have Gaza at the end of this. So the likelihood that this will change that, I would say, is 0. But that's a very rare actual 0 because there's nothing to even, we don't own anything there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The details are still out on exactly what that process looks like. Jared, previously we've heard the Israelis say they're going to clear out Gaza and try to annex it, or are they going to try to bring the Palestinians back into Gaza and try to screen out the Hamas folks, or what are they doing?
The Israelis weren't even saying annex or screen. They were talking about conquest without using the word conquest. They said clear them out, resettle, and they released a resettlement plan with new settlements. So
new Israeli settlements.
Yes.
So they're clearing out Palestinians,
towns, dropping in new Israeli settlements with Israelis. That's just naked conquest. There's no other way to put that.
Right. Yeah. Last weekend I watched a documentary on those settlements in the West Bank. It's pretty incredible. The number of arms, just looking at armed Israeli settlers, and of course, if you're Palestinian, you're not allowed to own firearms there, and just pretty violent stuff from settler attacks on the Palestinians there in the West Bank. I imagine Gaza as well. So, all right. And of course, it was kind of what you would call maybe left-wing propaganda video, but you know, it's good to get outside your bubble and watch stuff from their perspective as well. Pretty enlightening. And you know, it's hard to, when you see an armed settler shoot and kill a Palestinian, that's just a fact that it happens. All right. With that, everyone, thanks so much for the support. Mike, can you drop a link for that documentary? Yeah, I'll go back and look up. It was on I think it was on Max or HBO Max or whatever it is. But yeah, I'll go back and look up the name for sure. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for today's morning briefing. Thanks so much for the support. If you're new around here, we do this every morning, Monday through Friday, starting at 8 a.m. Central Time. We talk about stuff that matters going on at home and around the world. We appreciate your support. And we are going to start moving. We're going to get the new website live this week, start moving all subscribers over to the new platform. So stand by for some follow-up emails from me regarding your account. And with that, everyone have a great rest of your day. By the way, happy belated Father's Day to all the dads and granddads out there. And I appreciate that. I'll do what I can to feel better. So hopefully be back up to normal here pretty soon. So everyone, thanks so much for the support. We'll be back in your inboxes tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.